We're on the air. Today I'm with Zack Edwards, a conservative Christian who makes similar style videos to me, in that he makes them about politics and feminism and the like. And I saw him on a debate, or not really a debate, on a discussion with S-Man Speaks, who's someone that I've debated as recently as yesterday. So I thought it'd be interesting to converse with him and discuss these sort of issues that we've both sort of covered on our channels. I'll let you say a bit of stuff, Zach.
All right, what's up, everybody? My name is Zack Edwards, and I run a YouTube channel, and I rant about politics from what he said, a conservative Christian standpoint. But just a side note, I do have some libertarian-esque beliefs. I'm not exactly the stereotype that falls under, say, if you might think some typical right-winger like Mike Huckabee or the Bill O'Reillys or the Sean Hannitys of the world. Not like that. I don't even like Sean. Just putting that out there. And I am glad to be talking to be debating Owen live for the very first time. So let's get on with this.
Yeah, no, it'd be great to discuss stuff that we perhaps disagree on. Where would you like to start?
Well, there is a handful of issues that I want to talk about. One of them is the issue that kind of caught your attention, and that would be bigotry versus humor. Like S-Man was explaining that you think transgender jokes are transphobic, and so I made a kind of I guess you can say racial or even racist joke at you, but that's one issue. The other issue is that S-Man kind of wanted to see us debate about abortion. I want to leave religion for like a different live stream for right now. 3, I kind of want to talk about capitalism as well, touch on capitalism versus socialism. Yeah. And maybe we'll talk about feminism a bit, but I do not know how long you want to go on with this live stream, so that is all that I want to talk about.
Okay, no, that's some good topics.
I mainly want to talk about.
Sorry?
What I mainly want to talk about anyways.
Yeah, no, it would be good. I mean, the discussion will sort of naturally flow, and I imagine we'll sort of cover most of those talking points anyway. But you still wanted to start with transphobia and bigotry versus humor, as brought up by S-Man in your own stream with him.
Yeah, he was referring to one of your earlier videos that you was where you opened up with the line that it is transphobic to be making transgender jokes. And my question is, if somebody was to like make fun of Riley Dennis or even Blair White, for examples, how would there be an implication of bigotry or hatred or any of that sort of stuff?
Well, when you look at the sort of humor that's often directed at trans people, often it makes fun of the entire being of the trans person. So, for instance, jokes that are like making fun of a man in a dress and saying, "Oh, this is what trans women are," essentially like help reinforce negative stereotypes and worldviews about trans people. So it's not necessarily to say, "Oh, do not make jokes about a trans person." It's more asking people to reflect on the nature of the jokes that are made, because obviously it's silly to say, "Oh, person X cannot be made fun of ever," because like that's obviously not going to happen. But the jokes of which hold a transphobic nature are ones we're trying to avoid and examine as problematic, to use an overused word, the culture that we live in and how it reflects on those who are at the negative end of the joke, those who are being made the joke.
So of a transphobic nature is what you have a problem with. Like, say I had a transgender friend and I just wanted to tease on about his or her transgenderism. There would not necessarily be an implication that I am intolerant nor fearful to said person.
Well, I mean, it's contextual, isn't it? Like, if in the case that you knew someone who was both transphobic and okay with humor directed towards them, that made fun of something to do with them, obviously it's just you, so it's fine. Like, obviously everyone has their limits and boundaries. It's like, for instance, like obviously there are going to be gay people who are okay with homophobic jokes. However, on a wider context, spread around, the jokes that are made that make fun of trans people tend to punch down. Comedy that punches down isn't, I mean, yeah, fine, some people laughed at it, but ultimately it helps reinforce negative attitudes and stereotypes, especially as in the context of the wider world, where there is still a lot of genuine transphobia in society. We risk placing legitimacy to the worldview that allows trans people to be targeted and unfairly. So when you make jokes, for instance, that make fun of the idea of a man in a dress and trans women having supposedly male genitalia, you end up actually legitimizing those who actually do believe that trans women are just men in dresses, and to enact violence upon them, and to want to make laws to prohibit their rights and activities. And we risk allowing, if we just have all these jokes in society which make fun, of trans people, then you allow the transphobes and the far right to infiltrate discourse by mixing in jokes with actual insidious views. So that's essentially where I'm coming from. Like, it's okay, obviously, like if it's just having a laugh with like a mate, but in the wider context, you have to realize that there are dangers and real like problems with just having openly transphobic humor just flowing around society.
Well, I can understand that there is a certain line as far as manners go. Like, if you have a friend that just respectfully asks you to stop. Like, I have one friend who was overweight. He asked me respectfully to stop making overweight jokes at him, and I have respectfully stopped. But at the same time, I have like 3 or 4 other overweight friends that I poke at for being overweight all the time. And in return, they poke at me for being underweight because I'm a skinny ass, pretty much. And they don't really mind it that much. But if somebody was one to make fun of transgender people just in general as a group, like say for a stand-up comedy, let's say Louis C.K. or Eddie Griffin or any of those people wanted to make a stand-up about them, would that be transphobic? Would that be fearful and intolerant of transgender people?
I think it kind of would be, yeah. It'd be a bit questionable to see. So, for instance, someone like Louis C.K., a national figure when it comes to comedy, like someone who is well known, have got a large audience, they've got quite diverse group of people watching them. If their jokes are centering in on one already marginalized, often oppressed and targeted group, and sort of making jokes at their expense, then it's not really that, it's not a particularly effective comedy because it's punching down, and good comedy punches up. And plus, it doesn't, again, like I said, it doesn't help the already pretty poor situation regarding trans status and rights in society, because it helps legitimize actual transphobic views about trans people. And like in a perfect world, yeah, everyone would be able to have a laugh about things about themselves, and just it wouldn't matter in the context of society. But when it comes to like the real world, transphobia is still a thing, and the jokes that are told actually hold true to what people actually think about trans people. It's like with racist jokes and sexist jokes, like you can argue, oh well, they're just jokes, but at the same time, people hold the views in real life. Hence why it's poor taste to make many of the jokes. And with trans people especially, where in many parts of the world, even in fact not even a case of even in quite a lot of the Western world, like they're still only just getting even basic recognition. In many parts of America, trans people lack quite a few equality and discrimination protection acts and stuff. So it's like the fight is still going on to have them validated and recognized as actual people. So comedy that's just like making fun of them and taking a bit of a joke at them, it's like, well, it's not helping the climate for them. They're still being oppressed. And if you're just sort of making a laugh at them, then it's sort of like, what does that say about the way you view them if like they haven't even achieved equality?
Well, I think that my literal words would explain it. Like, if I was explaining my own ideology, would explain my views on LGBT people more than just a simple joke. Like, I think, in my opinion, it takes a whole lot more than jokes to be affirming hateful ideologies, be it anti-LGBT, anti-Black, anti-Asian, or anti-man, anti-woman, whatever have you.
Well, of course, yeah. Obviously, it's not just the jokes which are the problem, but the jokes like at core, focus in on something which is negative to be made fun of. So like I think I can't remember who said it, but someone said that comedy requires misery of some form to be funny. There needs to be someone suffering for the joke to work. And if the thing that is negative, which is being the source of the comedy, is literally just the fact that a trans person exists, or a trans person is not exactly the same as most people, then that suggests something a bit questionable about the joke. And well, yeah, you can say, oh well, just because people tell jokes doesn't mean they have to have that means they're hateful towards groups. And yeah, that can be true. People can be perfectly fine with a group of people and still make jokes at their expense. But ultimately, underlying that, there are problems with that, because if you're able to make these jokes and not realize the harm they're doing, then you are like sort of expressing a bit of a naivety about the situation we're in. Like, ultimately, like, what is more important than making jokes that humor you are the protection and status of trans people. And in the society we live in, where there are lots of transphobes, and that is just natural, like, fact. Essentially, you only have to go as far as like typing in like 2 genders on YouTube, and you just see the sort of responses and attitudes you'll find. Yeah, the jokes that are told allow entry and allow validity to transphobes trying to sort of disrupt and harm trans people.
So what was that you said about naivete on the subjects being connected to the jokes?
So it's like if you have the like attitude that, oh well, I'm not transphobic or homophobic or whatever, but let me tell my jokes about them because I'm not hateful. It's like, well, yeah, fine, you may well say you're not homophobic, but you're telling jokes which are like identical to the actual views of the people who are being transphobic, and sort of not considering the real world effect they have. Like, if you have just openly like bigoted jokes being told, it doesn't really matter what you think internally. What is being heard and what is being broadcast by public figures and stuff are the transphobic jokes. And as a result, you just have all this negative, like, transphobic language and the rhetoric being thrown around, and it becomes indistinguishable from the truth. It's like, for instance, if you imagine, like, in the 1920s in Germany, like, telling jokes about Jews, someone could well say, oh, well, I'm not anti-Semitic, I just like telling jokes, it's just a joke. But at the same time, you've got the growing far right and the growing like problem with Nazism in that time. And it's like,
well,
if
you gotta
would
see what the man's actions are that actually reflect his ideologies. Like, is he joking about Jews, but at the same time he is fighting against the Holocaust and other Nazi movements?
Well, no, I meant the hypothetical. Like, I meant if you have someone telling anti-Semitic jokes, it doesn't, like, in the context of the build-up towards Nazi Germany, the Weimar Republic, like, it's not helpful, because obviously there's a lot of that going on at the time. Like, it's the same thing applies today. Like, people are trying to invalidate and attack trans people. In fact, I'm pretty sure crime rates against trans people are rising. So having all these jokes about like trans people just sort of floating around is unhelpful. And someone can say, oh well, I would stand up for trans people if it came to it, but you're making it worse for trans people by allowing these jokes to infiltrate society.
It isn't helpful, but at the same time, it isn't in of itself harmful as well.
But it is, because it normalizes the language that transphobes use. Like, it takes something which isn't a negative, which isn't like bad, and makes it something that it has unnecessary ridicule, and thus gives ammunition and momentum to the transphobes who are trying to attack trans people. So it is harmful.
It gives momentum, huh?
Yeah. Well, if you have like the points you're making just sort of said anyway as quote unquote jokes, like it's going to allow you entry in, because then suddenly you now have the tools to say what you want, and you can either blend it in as jokes, but then also sort of mean it at the same time. And you end up with trans people feeling like ostracized and uncomfortable with themselves because of all the negative things being said about them as supposedly jokes. And then mixed into all that is like legitimate abusers who can sort of masquerade somewhere between the two, and then obviously legitimate abusers who will just say what they want when they want and feel pretty like incentivized to do it. And like that's not the attitude sort of approach we want to have. We don't need to be. There's nothing bad about mocking a trans person just for being trans. And in the climate we have, I don't think it's particularly healthy to be defending jokes of a transphobic nature.
Well, I can conceive that jokes of any kind can be badly timed, but a transgender joke or a racial joke, does that in of itself make the said person a transphobe or a racist, hateful towards said group?
Well, it's an interesting one. I mean, like I suppose like directly no, but it's never as simple as that, is it? Like you wouldn't. I don't think you can just say like, oh well, if you believe X, then you are racist, and if you therefore X not being believed means you're not racist. Like it's not, racism isn't just like a binary and stuff. Like so, for instance, people like moderates, for instance, quote unquote moderates, like at the time of the civil rights movement, they may well be completely fine. They'll be like, oh, well, black people should have rights, but if they say nothing, if they still tell the jokes which like the genuine racists say, then like what does that help? If you're like using the language and reinforcing the stereotypes and rhetoric of transphobes, then how does that help trans people at all? What use are you as an ally to trans people if you help and aid the language of transphobes more than you do trans people? If you make jokes at Riley J. Dennis's expense, like and the jokes are essentially just referring to her trans status and her like physical body and stuff, then it doesn't matter what you actually think of her. You're enabling those who abuse and harass Riley to be incentivized to do more. And it's like, well, like how can you honestly say that you are not transphobic and not aiding transphobes if like you're happy with and even participating in jokes which just reaffirm transphobic views of society? Like I think it's important to keep coming back to the fact that these jokes do nothing but harm trans people because they contribute to a culture of transphobia and enable transphobes to spread their message.
So yes or no, is making racial or trans jokes make the person a bigot?
Well, it's not as simple as that. Like, I mean, obviously, I understand that like you're asking for an answer, but I'm trying to like explain it. Like, it's there's no point just asking, oh, if I ask question X, then am I this? Like the person who is making transphobic jokes, yeah, you could say they are being transphobic. And as to whether are they a transphobe?
So I make a transgender joke, I instantly fear Blair White, and I fear Riley Dennis.
See, I feel as though you're coming
because that's what a phobia is. A phobia is a fear of said noun.
Well, yeah, but in the sense of this context, it's obviously got a bit more meaning to it. Like, or if you whittle it down to like the one definition it has, then yeah, fine. Phobia is literally fear, but fear manifests in different ways and stuff.
Even if you put in the definition of a phobia being an intoleration or a bigotry towards the said person, it doesn't instantly mean that they are intolerant to the person as a person just because they tease them as a joke. In fact, I hear this a lot from personal friends of mine. The only reason why they tease me is because they do like me. And if they didn't like me, they wouldn't tease me at all. Or they would like full out slander me if they hated me.
But can you see the difference between your friends and you joking about each other, like, and obviously still being friends, and like just transphobic jokes just being in general in society and normalized, and the allowance of transphobes to then get away with putting their like rhetoric and language in society? Like it extends beyond just the simple like, oh well, some of my friends are okay with it and stuff, and I've got contextually like examples of people being fine with jokes at their expense of this nature. It's bigger than that. And again, I use naive again because it is naive to sort of say, well, you don't, just making a joke doesn't make you hateful towards the whole group. Like you're aiding the views of those who are hateful towards this group. So it doesn't really matter what you are personally, because ultimately your contribution to the discourse is that you've allowed these transphobic views to be more legitimized.
Sticks and stones, man.
But it's not, is it though? Because like, yeah, fine, a
I
word
mean,
can't literally
the
destroy you.
person joking, that's like a sticks and stones situation. But the person who actually hates transgender people, or even black people, or any race of people, it's more of their ideology than what they actually say. Like, they have the freedom of speech to say whatever they want of how much they hate said group. It's just a matter of whether or not we let them get away with or whether or not we let their ideologies be implemented, like the banning of transitioning, or the banning of black people to go to the bathroom with white people,
But
and so on and so forth.
how do you think things reach that stage? Like, they don't just instantly appear and say, right, we're going to ban all these things. They get normalized and they get accepted by a public which is unwilling to act. So again, to draw us back to the comparison of Nazi Germany, Hitler didn't just appear and like suddenly in 1933 say, oh, we're going to just erase all the non-whites and the Jews and stuff. They normalized their talking points by making propaganda, by making jokes, by making things, pushing slowly and tactically to normalize their agenda and their worldview. And it worked because too many people did nothing, and too many people legitimized their worldview by not doing enough, and eventually they won power. And it's the same thing here. Like, we shouldn't be saying, oh, sticks and stones, and saying things like, oh, well, we have it's just a word and stuff, and it's just jokes. When the end goal of the transphobes is to eliminate and remove trans people. I don't think it's again. I say
Eliminate what? Those last few were garbled out.
Sorry,
You said were garbled out to legitimize what?
Legitimize the worldview of trans people. No, what am I saying? I was saying that transphobes are legitimized by the acceptance of their transphobic jokes. And it's naive to sort of say, oh, sticks and stones, because words are obviously the expression of thoughts. And if enough people think that transphobia is acceptable, or if even worse, if enough people will do nothing whilst transphobia is going on,
I think that the normalization of a transphobic belief, of an anti-LGBT belief, is more concerning than the normalization of merely a joke.
But the jokes represent the transphobia. That's the whole point. Like, they need the jokes as just the entry, because it's harder, right, to say things like just openly being bigoted towards trans people than it is to hide and subvert your transphobia through humor. But at the same time, you're still normalizing it. You're just being clever about it, because you're finding the source of you're still pushing the source of your point, which is the transphobic like ideas about trans people, but you're normalizing it through humor and through comedy, which is why it's dangerous to have just transphobic jokes floating around. I don't feel as though you're fully like grasping the danger of sort of just allowing jokes to stand, which are like transphobic and stuff. Because yeah, fine, like a joke isn't as bad as like a some like racist, some Nazi going out and like beating a trans person in the street. But at the same time, like, what gives that transphobe the incentive and the motivation and the belief that they can get away with it to do that? It's the people who normalize and allow transphobic jokes to stand. And it's dangerous because trans people are at risk, as we're seeing in crime rates and stuff.
I guess you and I just have a little bit of a different worldview as far as the connection between freedom of speech, or speech in general, and ideologies, and the restriction of freedom.
But no one's saying freedom of speech is like being questioned here. But people should have consequences for what they say. So the person, people should be taught that no, transphobia is wrong, and these jokes.
Right. Teach them to be tolerant towards the person, but a parent can teach their kids that they can be lightened up and have a bit of a sense of humor, be it one that comes off as racist or transphobic, but at the same time teach those kids that we should not be restricting the liberties of said people.
but why? Like, why should trans people have to suffer all this humor like against them
Like
simply because
you use the word suffer again. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never harm me.
but words do? Oh, I feel like we're going around in circles here. Like, words do contribute to harmfulness, though. Words are what you use to like convey messages, and if enough people believe the messages that the words convey, then it manifests in eventually harm. And as we're seeing, trans people are targeted, attacked, and killed for being trans, which is why it's incredibly like sort of naive again, trying to think of a different word, but it's ignorant of the reality of the situation to just say, oh, well, sticks and stones, because all things start with words, and the words grow and the ideas get stronger until you end up with action. As with all, as with what history shows, like the Nazis didn't just appear and everyone just turned into Nazis. They pushed their worldview through words and through dialogue, and by normalizing their agenda. And eventually, they were able to seize control and then have the actions of the Night of Broken Glass and the burning of synagogues and obviously the final solution and stuff. Like, words is what it always starts as, and then it grows into action. So instead of allowing trans people to be the victims of more transphobia and even more abuse, we should say no. We can stop this by addressing the ridiculous, like, transphobic jokes that exist in society, realizing they're just rubbish and they're not really even funny because, like, if you're at core, they're just making fun of like trans people's status.
I don't know. Westman seemed to
Move on.
laugh at my little tease at you.
Sorry?
I mean, that's not That's not a transgender joke, and that's not the issue of transgenderism. But still, it's a similar subject in the fact that basically an ethnic minority group, LGBT people and black people in the Western world. That's how I would like say that is the equivalent to.
What? Sorry, are you so I'm a little bit lost. What did you say? Sorry,
I'm sorry. You said that trans jokes are not funny.
Well, if you break them down, if you actually think about where the humor's coming from,
that's what you just said earlier, is that trans jokes are not funny, or generally not funny. I can't remember the exact wording you said, but you said
well, they shouldn't be funny, should they? Like, they shouldn't. If you think about what the joke is, it's not a particularly funny thing. Like, it's punching down at things that aren't even negative. So, like, where the humor's coming from transphobia, essentially. Is it not?
The transphobia is coming from a sense of humor, from
sorry, the humor of the joke, like a humor of a transphobic joke, is purely coming from the fact that a trans element has been introduced. The humor is derived from transphobia, or transphobic views. So, for instance, whenever you see like a man in a dress joke, like, what is that at core? That is just like the idea that someone you perceive to be a man in a supposedly female article of clothing is funny, when in fact, no, that's not the case. What is actually funny about that? There's nothing like wrong about that. So the joke is only coming from transphobia at core, really. Like, the whole point of the joke is transphobic. If I get, obviously, yeah, it's when you hear these like things, it's like, oh, well, I'm not transphobic just because I tell what's one trans joke. But if we actually break down the comedy and we analyze the joke, it's like, well, yeah, it is. It's transphobia. So, I think it's important to analyze these sort of things we're saying. Hence why I feel as though transphobic jokes need to be sort of cut out, really, because like, what's the point? All you're doing is aiding transphobes, and the joke itself is just transphobic. So, like, why bother? But did you just get like a message or something?
Yeah, I did. I was just silencing my phone right there. I'm gonna ignore it. So, what you said earlier, I want to recall back on this conversation a little bit. What you said earlier is that transphobic jokes, that trans jokes in general, is what leads up to a anti-transgender ideology, an anti-transgender ideology succeeding in a society.
I said it contributes to that. Like, it's part of normalizing and enabling the transphobic views.
Well, I would like to I would like to look on the other side of the coin of that, because I would think that a trans joke would also help develop somebody a thicker skin. Like, for example, I don't want to equivalate my Christian beliefs and my Christianship to transgenderism, but for a long time, I basically lived in myself an echo chamber, a Christian conservative echo chamber when I was a kid. I think we can say that generally, that all of us as a kid, we were either not politically involved or we pretty much just lived in an echo chamber. But anyway, I lived in an echo chamber and I did not hear hardly a single Christian joke for the longest time in my life. But then the more and more I got exposed to Christian jokes, I cannot name any off the top of my head, but they are out there on the internet. The more and more I got exposed to these, the thicker skin I got towards that, and even conservative jokes, for example, or white jokes, for that matter as well.
But can you see how, in those cases, for the most part, the joke is punching up at groups that have traditionally had more power and being favored by society, whereas a trans joke is generally made against, like, it's generally punching down and making fun of something which is like faced actual like more prescient like discrimination in society. I mean, you're looking pretty skeptical of that, but it's true. Like,
so making conservative Christian white male jokes is punching up, but making liberal black transgender jokes is pushing down.
I wouldn't say liberal, but can you see a difference?
Okay, not liberal. But I said conservative earlier. I thought it would only be fair to mention the opposite side of the political spectrum in the other case.
Not quite the opposite, I would say. But no, but
okay,
can you
fine.
see
A full-blown Marxist like yourself, Owen? Happy?
No, but no, seriously, can you see how with comedy, the like whole point is that you sort of punch up to make the joke funny. Otherwise, it's a little bit rubbish to punch down at marginalized groups. Like, I'm not. I mean,
all the times a trans joke is going to be punching down.
Like, in what context, though, is making fun of something trans, something about a transgender person that is trans, is going to be punching up? Like, if that context doesn't exist in our society, sadly.
Okay. I cannot think of a transgender joke off the top of my head that punches up, specifically one that you would think would be punching up, because all in all, senses of humor is subjective. I mean, you'll find different things funny that I won't find funny. I will find different things funny that you won't find funny, and so on and so forth.
No, of course, yeah. Of course, humor is subjective. However, what isn't subjective is the sort of the context and the situation that trans people have faced. Like, if you go back a few decades, like, what were trans people even considered? Like, what were ideas like non-binary? They weren't allowed to be expressed because of the sort of nature of the world. It's a very recent part of history that we've even seen any sort of recognition and acceptance of trans people. And in fact, we still have pushback against that quite vehemently. So I feel as though just like portraying it as just, oh, senses of humor will always be different and you just got to allow some jokes is a little bit like, it's not particularly accurate.
So don't allow any jokes.
That's not what I said. Like, there are better jokes you can make than just like making jokes about trans people, especially when if you have like more empathy, you can see that it's not helpful at all to be making jokes which contribute to transphobia. Like, I feel as though there's more important things in the world than making jokes which aren't which are relatively flawed.
Well, of course, but we're only human and we want to have some form of enlightenment and a sense of humor. A good sense of humor is one of the good ways to brighten up everybody's spirit. I mean, yes, it depends on the situation. Like, if you have some thin-skinned wimp, I mean, whoever it be, I'm not just saying specifically a transgender is a thin-skinned wimp, but anyone who's a thin-skinned wimp that does not like the joke being said around them, well, then that's the wrong situation. But I'm not.
I mean, I don't. Well, firstly, like, it's all very well saying people are thin-skinned wimps, but like, if you've lived in a society where your whole identity and like state of being has been sort of persecuted against and attacked and potentially like something you could be even killed for, then you can sort of understand why it's quite hurtful and like quite horrible to have jokes like this floating around. And secondly, oh, what was I going to say? No, I can't remember the second thing I was going to say. But it's not quite the same thing, I think. Anyway, shall we sort of try to perhaps interject? Shall we move on to a different argument, or do you want to continue on this point?
No. I don't really have any more points to make regarding that subject.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we should just move on because we're kind of running in circles, and I've said pretty much all that I wanted to say. Have you said pretty much all that you wanted to say?
Oh, I feel as though, yeah, like, I agree. We sort of are going round in circles.
All right. So next subject. I want to go on to abortion. Now, this is an issue that I hold very close and near and dear to my heart. And of course, have you seen any of my videos regarding abortion specifically?
I've not watched any of your abortion videos, no.
Yeah, if you look in my channel description, you can see that it specifically says anti-abortion. I will take either the title of anti-abortion or pro-lifer. Personally, I mean, there are some people in my community who prefer pro-lifer rather than anti-abortion. But anyway, I'm rambling.
Why? What may I ask? Why you hold this view?
Why do I hold this view?
Yeah.
Well, when I was very young, there was a picture that I saw of one of Dr. George Tiller's victims. It was a baby just mutilated on the table, like it looked like a 20-week conceived baby or something along those lines. And my general stance is of why somebody would want to hurt the most innocent among us. Okay. My stance is that everybody deserves the right to life. I mean, unless you are invading somebody else's right to life as well by harming them, by committing physical harm on them of any types, whether it be killing them, injuring them, or raping them, that is when that your right to life essentially becomes null and void, and the other person is allowed to defend himself, or any other person is allowed to defend that victim against the person committing harm. And I believe that this applies to the unborn among us as well, especially since they're the most innocent amongst our society because they had done nothing, and yet they are one of the biggest victims of murder.
Well, I mean, would you really describe a fetus and like a thing growing inside someone as a life, really? I mean,
yeah.
But why? How do you define life? Like,
have you ever seen a sonogram or a mammogram of them moving? Brain waves is detected as early as about 6 weeks. Like, I believe that life starts at conception, personally, but I am definitely drawing the line for when brain waves can be detected.
Oh, of course, it would have like signs of like activity, but in terms of human life, in terms of being an actual like baby that's born and stuff, when it can actually touch and feel and be an actual sort of person, would you describe something just growing in a person's womb as a life, really?
Yes, I would. There's one video of an unborn fetus, like trans people are. Sorry, I'm looking at the chat here.
Is someone referring to our previous topic?
All right. Yeah, I see. But when I defined personhood is if they are a thinking, feeling, a human being. They have their own unique DNA code of a human. Like, obviously, if you like extracted a piece of skin off of me or you or anyone, that would be defined as human, but it is still of your own DNA code. But there is a unique DNA when it comes to the fetus.
But do you think that a like fetus can actually think? Like, it's got no actual emotions or concept of anything. It's just a thing.
I would tend to disagree regarding the no emotions, because there are videos of botched abortions that they might not be botched abortions, but they were early botched births, I guess you could say. One of them, I think, was the result of a car accident, and they were as early as 12 and 13 weeks, and they were squirming in fear for when they were just lying on the table being examined by the doctors.
That's not quite the same thing, though, is it? And again, even that's like not quite.
That's not emotion.
Well, no, it's if it's writhing in pain, then no, that's not, pain and emotion aren't quite the same thing, are they? Like you an organism naturally wants to defend itself and keep itself alive and sustain itself. So to describe like pain as emotion, I don't think it's the same thing. It has no concept of any of the things that make us human, the things you would call another person human.
It's not necessarily that they were just in pain; it's that they were being poked and prodded by these creatures that they did not know, that they were just being exposed to the world. They were in fear.
That's not the same thing, is it? That's feeling. That it's not it's like biologically just reacting to an unknown object, an alien object, and like being defensive. That's like the that's not the same thing as feeling fear and emotion. It doesn't have any concept of fear. It's just trying to defend itself. It's not alive. But ultimately, I feel as though like even it's essentially not a life to be lost, because it's what life, like what has it actually got? Is it an organism essentially? And more importantly, what about the life of the person who's carrying the organism, the like fetus?
Well,
what about their life? What happens
if both lives are legitimately in danger, then it becomes kind of a moot point. Either one or both is going to die, and the person, the mother, has the right to choose whether she wants to try and risk her life and carry out the birth, or to save her own life. She can terminate the pregnancy. Like, it's still a very sad situation, but when it becomes that they're both endangered, either both of them or one of them is going to die, that's where it becomes a bit of a moot point.
But even in a situation where it's not life or death, like let's just say it's a woman gets pregnant and she doesn't want to have the baby, like what's wrong with that? The thing going inside her is not a life, it's just part of her which she can choose to have removed or like terminated or whatever. What's like actually, why should her life be impeded by like the decisions of others?
Well, if she has the right to murder them inside, what makes them not have the right to kill their own child outside the womb?
Right. How you can't really define something just growing inside them as a life, like any more so than like it's essentially just a set of like I don't know, genes and chromosomes growing inside little organisms. You can't describe it as a
They're
life,
not just genes and chromosomes. They're like, they have their own organs as well. I mean, especially at, I think it's 13 weeks, they're pretty much fully developed, have nerve endings. They have their own fingerprints, their own beating heart, brain, and lungs, and everything that is necessary.
Well, no, but yeah, obviously it has like some like elements of human anatomy, but that's not the same thing as a human life. It's still essentially just an organism. It's not felt anything beyond just like basic it's not felt emotionally anything. It has no concept of anything. It's never seen what is growing inside it. It has no relation to the actual world. Like it's ridiculous, I feel, to describe it as a life in the equivalent sense of the mother's life. Like, so I don't think it's at all equivalent to say, oh well, if you it's not murder at all, because it's not a life to murder or end. It's an organism, no more than say like in having a vaccination to defend against a disease. And obviously it's not the same thing as that, but it's just something inside her.
Of a different species, for lack of a word.
But essentially, it is just an organism growing inside the woman, the person. It's like it's not.
So the unborn fetus inside the womb has a brain, heart, and everything the same as me, just it's smaller, and it's an entirely different organism.
It's got anatomy that will eventually grow if it was born, but it's not a life because it has no conscience, it has no concept of anything. It's not the same as an actual like child. Like say for instance, right? If if there's like it's a bit of a weird example. Imagine there's like a murderer. One hand they've got a fetus, the other hand they've got a newborn baby. They drop both. Who are you going to like go and catch? You're going to catch the baby because the baby is alive, whereas a fetus and or whatever stage it's at is just that. It's just some like organism essentially. It's a bit of a morbid example, but it's sort of like you're instinctively going to save the actual life, not the organism that's growing, because it's not really a life. It's like using this, like you could argue that what about like the billions of sperm inside someone's penis? Like, are they not all lives too? Because they have many of them. They contain the chromosomes and genes and stuff needed to create the life, to have the conception of the egg.
Are you just a sperm that grew somehow?
Sorry?
Are you just a sperm that grew somehow?
Well,
because
obviously.
When human life starts to develop is at conception, the merging of both the egg and the sperm. None of us are just sperm. None of us are just eggs.
Well, the actual life starts at birth.
And if we want to say that all sperms are basically human, then we would have to develop some new technology. We would have to ban masturbation for one, and I find that to also be a bit of a moot point, because in the natural flow of things, of how you make a baby, for lack of a better word, there are millions of sperm that die anyway.
Well, that's my point though. Like these like it's ridiculous to suggest that millions die every time you have sex or you ejaculate or whatever. Well, it's ludicrous, because that's not the case, because they die anyway, because obviously like semen didn't just stay in your penis. It like either leaves or like discharges or whatever, like, and the sperm that's there dies. The life cycle of a sperm is like only a few months essentially. Like, I'm pretty sure. I wasn't very good at biology in school, but my basic knowledge of it is that it's not very long. So are all humans just like naturally murderers, like, because of that? No, of course not. It's ridiculous, because
well,
it's
I'm not arguing
alive.
for the protection of sperm. I'm arguing for the protection of a fully developed unborn human being.
But it's not
organs and everything.
It isn't being. It's not got sentience or conscience. It's not alive. Why am I, for instance, 19 years old as of July, and not when I was conceived in 9 months before July? Because the life starts when I was born. It's the same thing. You can't say that it's a murder to have an abortion, because there's no life there. All you're doing is terminating
conception at the moment of conception is a little bit trickier to spot out when it actually happens, rather than the day of your birth.
Okay, well, yeah, fine, but then why is it not? It's still like somewhere between 9 or 8 months. Why am I not closer to 20 now than I am to 19? Because the life starts when you're born. Like yeah, obviously it's an organism growing. I'm not saying that like nothing's happening and
that the life starts at birth. So what is it when it is breathing and has a beating heart?
No, I'm talking about
a sign of life.
The act, not like physical, like being functioning. It's like an actual being, like emotions and what makes us human. It's not like to have actual concepts. And I think all of this is irrelevant, because the woman the person with egg and the sperm and stuff is inside, the person where the conception is happening, that's the person that's most important. That is their ultimate decision to make the have the abortion. I think it's not at all up to grabs what people's views on life are. Because ultimately,
I'm sure that's what a psychopathic serial killer would say as well.
I don't think that's a fair comparison at all. Like, you can't just portray people who have abortions as psychopathic serial killers. At the end of the day, it's a person.
No. You're saying that people's view of life should not determine on whether or not people get an abortion, have the right to get an abortion. Well, I'm pretty sure, like I said, I'm pretty sure that is what psychopathic serial killers think to themselves as well when they go out to shoot up a school, for example, or some crap like that.
But can you not see how that's just a pretty terrible comparison? Because whilst the people in the school are actual lives, the organism growing inside the person who's pregnant is just an organism that can be terminated. There's no life there. No one, bar perhaps, yeah, obviously there are a lot of pro-life people, but it's not a life. It's like not, it hasn't lived. It's not had human life. And when I say life, I don't just mean like, oh, organisms moving around. I mean like an actual thinking, feeling, being a human, being the most advanced and intellectual and capable species on the planet. It's not that at all. It's just organisms. And yeah, fine. Obviously, it grows, but it is just an organism, really, and it is perfectly legitimate and not murder at all to have the abortion. And I can't believe we're even debating this, to be honest. I don't think this is really a legitimate thing, to be honest.
Why? Because men should just shut up and let the women have it?
What, where's that coming from?
Well, I'm just asking, why are you saying that we shouldn't even be having this debate?
Well, because I don't think that I don't think it should be past the point of like, oh, is abortion allowed? Like, yeah, it's a person's body. They should be able to do with it what they want. And like, if you can have your own views on when life starts, but that's
you have a second body involved.
Sorry, it's not a body though, is it? It's not a it's not an actual life. But I don't think your view of when life starts should be impeding other people's like views. And say your view is implemented and we ban abortions. What happens to all these children? What happens to the mothers who can't like support these kids? You're a fan. You're what, a libertarian, aren't you? You're a capitalist. Like you don't actually support many of the programs and the help and the equality that is needed to support them in the first place. So where are these kids going to go? Like you're asking mothers to birth organisms they don't want and then doing nothing to help them afterwards. I think that's quite like abhorrent, really. That's quite appalling to put people through that.
Well, I know it's not a very libertarian thing for me to be saying, but I would much rather that if we had a giant safety net for everybody, like I would rather that welfare increase than abortions increase. Like if we could have a society where welfare, providing welfare increased exponentially, but abortions were like down to next zero, like they will not go away entirely, obviously. But I would much rather that abortions were next to gotten rid of and welfare was increased than we get rid of welfare, but abortion was increased exponentially.
Well, it's funny you should mention welfare because I think we should segue onto our next topic of capitalism versus socialism, unless you had any other points you wanted to make about abortion. Because I feel as though I've sort of said most of what I want to say. Like,
well, I don't see. What do you consider as the start of human life then?
Birth, when the baby is out of the womb and like, out of the when the woman is given birth, when the person is given birth.
What about a day before birth?
Day before
birth, developed and pretty much ready to come out at any moment, practically. What about a 9-month fetus?
Well, yeah, essentially, I don't think they do. I don't think they give abortions at that point. But
obviously, but you stated that birth was when that it starts, and now you're saying that it is like right around 8 to 9 months, or 9 months, as I specifically said.
Well, no, obviously the life starts when it's born, but you wouldn't at that point conceivably. You're not going to have an abortion at that stage. Like you want the child to be born. Obviously. At that point, it is like nearly about to start its life. It's sort of like I
don't know. There are some pretty piece of crap parents out there, aren't there? When you agree?
Yeah, but what surgery is gonna give like someone an abortion at like what 8 months pregnant or 9 months pregnant? But regardless, ultimately it's up to the parents. Oh, sorry, it's up to the person who has the person inside them. Not person, sorry. It's up to the person who has the organism inside them and thus I don't feel as though it comes into it. But anyway, enough on abortion. It's time to segue into
Oh,
capitalism
what?
and
I
socialism.
was just getting started.
Oh,
I was
did you
just
have
getting
more? Sorry,
started.
did you? Sorry, I thought you were closing up. Okay, well, so just quickly, someone asked in the chat, Zach, are you a vegetarian?
Well, is it really a pro-life position to be eating vegetables as well? Because technically they are alive as well. I consider myself more anti-abortion. I think that is a more accurate title to be given me than well, pro-life. I would like the title of pro-life, but the thing is, I'm also for self-defense. And sorry, S-Man just posted right there. But yeah, the point of the pro-life movement is that we are for the preservation of human life, specifically innocent human life.
Well, then
And
why?
the most innocent among us is the unborn.
But then you allow, okay, so you're saying things like that, but then when they're born into the world, you I mean, I'm pretty sure most pro-life people are on the right. You do nothing to help these people. You allow people to suffer endlessly under the system, do nothing and to help them, even reduce the help the minimal help they're already getting. And then when like they're in awful conditions, like you
Oh,
say,
it's just a
just
joke.
it's like it's silly, I think, to claim that anyone on like the anti-abortion side is pro-life, because clearly you're not, because more people are suffering from the organism growing into something that's ready to be born. Like, what's the point of it being born if no one wants it? It's an organism, and it's a person's choice whether they want it to be born. And if they don't, then it doesn't matter where you think life begins. That's their choice. I don't think it's acceptable for you to have the position that you do, to be honest. Like, you can't just force people to do what your wish is on meeting your views on life.
I don't have to be a woman to know that abortion is murder, bro.
Well, you're wrong, essentially. I think we've both said all there is to say on abortion. Shall we move on to the much awaited capitalism versus socialism?
Well, we kind of go into the transitioning from abortion to capitalism versus socialism when you go mentioning how capitalism kills. The thing is, it is illegal right now to actively kill somebody, but is not required by law for people to be obligated to help out somebody else. Is a difference between abortion, because abortion is actively killing somebody, whereas a lack of welfare, for example, that is like letting die somebody who might not be your business.
Well, I think it's a sad state of society where someone dying is just disregarded as not someone's business. We've already been over the sort of questionable standpoint of saying that a life has already begun, like inside the womb, in some little organism. But no, I think that like capitalism.
Okay, I wanna sum up my position. My position is that everybody, including the unborn among us, has the right to life. And the unborn among us, how they are human, is that they are a different person from their mother. They have their own fully developed, I mean, especially at 13 weeks and beyond, they have their own fully developed organs, and they are emoting beings. They may not be thinking, not necessarily, but they are emoting. It's because that they are in such a secluded, dark area. There is not much that they can think about except for I want to live, I want to get out of here, or I want to see the world.
But like, you don't think it's a bit silly saying that, though? Because like, what, they don't know there's a world outside. They don't have any concept of anything because they're not alive. It's a bit ridiculous.
You keep on saying they're not alive, but they are breathing and they have a beating heartbeat. But they are alive. I mean, debate whether or not you think they are human or not, but it is pretty much scientifically a fact that they are alive.
Okay, yeah, scientifically they are alive, but emotionally, like what have they to think? it's silly to say that they are the equivalent to a lie. You can't compare a murder in the actual world to like an abortion, because one is an actual like sentient thinking thing, and the
Well,
other is just an organism.
technically, a fetus is in the world, just inside the woman,
No, but
which is inside the world.
it's not like able to interact with anything. It's completely dependent on another person. It's essentially just part of their body, really. Like it's just a body part at that stage. I don't think you can really class it as like that.
So lack of interaction is a factor to how they're not human.
Well, like I feel as though you're trying to look for little pointers when overall the whole point I'm trying to make is that you can't call something that has like essentially no concept, no real I guess interaction, no existence in the outside of real world, and it's essentially just a little organism inside the person it's completely dependent on. Like if so what if like it's ridiculous to sort of continue this line of argument. I don't see why people should have to suffer with something they don't want growing inside them simply because you've defined life as literally the moment of conception.
Well, I guess we'll end it off at that. Might be another subject that we are running in circles, but hey. Oh well, I'm being entertained by this, by us having this discussion.
It's very interesting, and the most interesting is yet to come. Capitalism versus socialism. You can start. You begin.
Regarding capitalism versus socialism.
Yeah, or just one of the two. To be honest, capitalism or socialism. I'm happy to talk about either.
Well, I'm for pro-choice, but to play devil's advocate, Owen, you are assuming that no cognition occurs before birth. It's effectively the Schrodinger's cat problem that we have no way of knowing. Sorry, I just got distracted by that little bit in the chat. This is my first like official debate. Like I sparred a little bit, but it was more of a discussion than it was a spar with Owen on abortion. But yeah, on capitalism, I have this general belief that liberty is good. Now, regarding abortion, you think that a person should have the liberty to choose what they want to do with their own body, but I believe that the unborn has the liberty to life. Just to avoid that little bit of hypocrisy I might be accused of. But regarding capitalism, I believe in private property rights, that what you own is decided upon you, what you want to do with it, that being a business or a house, for example. And you can do whatever you want with your business, decide however much you want to pay your workers, whatever you decide you think is going to keep your company afloat, or even to help advance your company or advance the lifestyle of yourself or some of your best employees.
Well, talking about employees, do you not think capitalism enables the exploitation of your employees? Do you not think the concept of profit is deeply flawed because it allows a boss to seize money generated by someone who wasn't them? So, for instance,
money that wasn't generated by them?
So, okay, so imagine a situation that you've got a factory, you've got the workers doing the work, making the goods, and they produce a sum of money. The boss comes in, he prizes most of that money for himself, and then hands back scraps to.
Can I interject right there?
Yeah, sure.
They wouldn't have a place to work if the business owner did not buy the piece of land that he needs and cultivated the money into building that business, or even bought an old building for that matter, and put in all the furnishings to help his business operate.
The interjection there is that we live under the assumption there that the labor hours are what you need to sell in order to have your place in society. In a socialist society, everyone is able to either be provided for, or it's each according to their ability, each according to their need. And given that the way the world's moving, where we don't need as many physical jobs, we don't need just physical labor, we don't actually need everyone to hold jobs. It would be actually more beneficial if a lot of people were able to dedicate their time to more academic stuff and more like thinking and jobs, not necessarily jobs, but just activities that were just productive.
So you're for automation?
Sorry?
So you're for automation?
I'm for what makes life easier for the planet and for humanity. And yeah, I think that if we if we have robots and computers that can do things better than humans can, it's important to use them and then make life easier for humans. And I think a system where you need to sell your labor hours in a world where the jobs that you need to have the labor hours put into are getting lesser in number, fewer in number even. That's a deeply flawed point. I don't think, and going back to what I was saying, it's theft for a boss to prize money that was generated by the workers. The workers did the work, and the boss did none of it.
The worker agreed to work for the boss, so I do not see how it's theft. It's not like the boss is going up to the worker and saying, "Give me your money, or I will shoot you."
Yes, but in capitalism, like if you don't do that, then you're essentially unemployed, and you're relying on minimal welfare. And in America, especially,
you're gonna have to work to survive. Be the same thing if there was no civilization.
You can't say then that the worker agreed to it, because it's not legitimate agreement. It's forced. Like in a fair society where you didn't have to sell your labor hours to survive, this wouldn't take place. Like you wouldn't if the boss said, "Oh, I'm going to take most of the money, but you have to work for me." In a fair society, the worker could say, "No, why would I work for you? You're taking money from me for stuff that I'm doing for you. I made the money, but you're taking the majority of it. So no."
Well, the money did not go directly to the worker, or he transfers the money to the boss, and then the boss gives out the pay. Like
yes, but the boss then in capitalist society, the boss is taking the majority of the money. So look at what CEOs make compared to those.
Yeah, he's taking the majority of the money to pay the bills and even make himself a living.
Well, no, but the money. So, for instance, why are CEOs and those in the height of the company billionaires and millionaires and the wealthiest and live luxury lives, whilst the workers who do the work and who essentially keep the company going earn pitiful amounts compared to that? Look at, for instance, a company like, I don't know, like McDonald's or something, for instance. It's a pretty basic example. But if you took out the boss of McDonald's, the workers, yeah, fine, there's no boss anymore, but they can self-organize. They can form unions. They can form Soviets to organize themselves. Take out the workers, and what's going to happen to McDonald's? Who's going to be manning?
I'm sorry, you can form what? You can form unions, and you can form what? Because it almost sounded like you said what?
Soviet. A Soviet, like a group of workers leading themselves and like talking and communicating and stuff.
Soviets.
Yeah. So because sorry, the Soviet originates from Russia. The Soviets were like worker unions essentially. So I know it's like the word. But no, it's true though. Like workers are capable of self-organization, and they don't need a CEO prizing their money that they generated from them to simply like hire them and stuff. Like I said, McDonald's would be nothing without the workers, yet they get minimum wage, if that. And the CEO of McDonald's is what, a billionaire probably. Like the shareholders are the ones with all the power for doing nothing. It's a colossally unfair system. And if you remove the workforce that is being exploited,
the world isn't fair.
Nothing. Sorry?
The world isn't fair, man.
Can you not see that's a bit of a silly thing to say? Like, if it's not fair, then you change it. And hence capitalism isn't fair, so you change the system to a better one. You allow the workers to be liberated from
but I would strive to raise myself up on the economic ladder rather than go to the government, say tax my boss more so that you can give me his money.
The whole point is that we get rid of bosses. We don't need one. We don't need individuals and the collective few governing and dictating over the many.
Okay, but for starters, you aren't going to get rid of business managers completely. A start-off point for a lot of people is taxing more the upper class, say, for example. You go saying that the workers, they can run the businesses on their own. Like, what do you mean by that? Are you saying that most, if not all, workers have a leadership position, the leadership ability to sift through the tons of regulations and paperwork and financing to running the business?
Well, yes, like essentially. I mean, it's easy to portray like the situation as, oh, it's going to be incompetent workers struggling with paperwork and struggling with the management of massive things. But the thing is, in socialism, there's this amazing saying.
There's a reason why.
If you let me finish, there's an amazing saying, which no worries. To each according to their from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. So those who are fit for the job are able to manage themselves, and consequently, because of the collaboration and the teamwork and the aim that everyone is able to benefit from this, the company and stuff would be legitimate and in the best interest of everyone. So instead of the aims being, oh, I need to make the most money I can, it's beneficial for everyone to be being productive. Sorry. But I think an important point is you mentioned the economic ladder. Like the economic ladder is a massive cause of suffering. I don't think that wealth should be something that people can better themselves with when they're just like owning more money. That's not something which I think is particularly fair, because it leaves those at the bottom in poverty and in terrible conditions. Like, it's silly to have that installed when that essentially that leaves millions just in poverty, and especially with capitalism too, where you need money to make money, and you need to be well off essentially to have a good chance of doing well. Like, and it's very unlikely that you'll escape poverty if you're born into poverty. It's pretty flawed to say, oh well, you just need to work harder and better yourself economically, because it's a rigged game. Like, so instead, wealth should not be something which is unequal, and essentially, like, otherwise you end up with millions living in poverty and just endless suffering.
Okay, so what do you mean by a rigged game? Because if you're talking about like government intervention into the economy and say like crony capitalism, for example, like there's free market capitalism and there's crony capitalism where the government works with the big corporations to help rig the game in their favor. Like by all means, I'm all against government intervention into the markets to make it unfair for the lower among us to go up the ladder, the economic ladder. But from a freedom aspect, if the upper class, if the rich boss, for example, if the rich guy like legitimately earned his money to get up to where he was, like he cultivated the money to expand his company and hire all the people that he needed, buy all the machinery he needed, and he did that all with his own money and not with any help from the government, and he got up to where he was, well, then I have no problem with that.
Well, does that example actually exist though? Like,
I don't know, Steve Jobs got from like being an orphan in a foster care situation to being one of the top dogs in America.
But he had people working underneath him who he prized for profit from to get his wealth. His money came from the stolen labor wage of others. Like, can you not see how in capitalism there's always exploitation, because you're always taking profit from other people that other people have done? And if you look at where Apple make their products, they make them in third world countries where they pay their workers like pennies essentially. And those on top of like the Apple managers and stuff, and the CEOs and people like Steve Jobs get the vast majority of the money, whilst those in the third world essentially get crap jobs, crap lives, and if they leave their jobs because of capitalism, they will die essentially. Like, there's no process in capitalism which is fair essentially, because you're always reliant on profits to excel yourself, and as a result, you're always going to be exploiting someone. Steve Jobs is someone who is like, yeah, fine, you can say what you like about how amazing Apple are, but at the end of the day, all TNCs rely on exploitation of their workers. And that's why ultimately capitalism is always going to be unfair, because this very core idea of profit and the idea of bettering yourself over others in a profit financial way leads to the suffering of others, and you have to exploit the people underneath you. And I think humanity is so much better than that, to be honest.
Okay, I guess I completely disagree with the notion of stealing labor, because employment is basically a mutual agreement. And no, you're not forced to work for one specific company. You can work for any company that you want to. If you want to say that they are forced to work for a company and they cannot be lazy, well, yeah, no shit. If we just had no civilization at all, no rich people, no capitalism or socialism, just everybody was in the wild, a free individual would have to go and pick berries or hunt an animal or something like that for them to feed themselves and their family, or they will starve and die. Capitalism is just basically a more advanced version of that. You will have to work if you are going to survive and ultimately thrive. And now, employment, that is a mutual agreement. You are saying, I will work for you for this much wage, and the boss is saying, I will give you this much wage for this much labor. You guys shake on it, and you agree to work for the boss, and the boss agrees to hire you. Or you don't agree, and you can just move on to the next company on down. They're not stealing your labor. They're offering you a position where you can offer your labor to the manager of said business.
Again, that's not. I mean, firstly and foremostly, it's not a real agreement. It's essentially one party has.
So I was forced to work for Village Inn, the restaurant that I worked for beforehand, and I was forced to work for the manufacturing job that I work right now.
That's not quite what I meant. I more meant the conditions that you're accepting. There's no agreement to it. You're in a situation where people are in a situation where
yeah,
if
and
they
I
don't
can quit
work,
whenever I want
starve.
to.
If they don't work, they'll starve. If they don't agree to sell their labor hours for a ridiculously low price, then their way of life is going to just come to a crashing halt. Like, it's ridiculous to argue that you just agreed to have your labor sold, because no, you're not under capitalism, you're in no position to challenge that. Unless you're extremely lucky, you're going to have a boss who's taking the majority of the profit from what you did. To have that money raised, it's not a fair situation at all. Why is it fair for those who do the work to not receive what the value of the work they did? Moving on to what you said about capitalism is just an advanced form of natural, like, human scourging and stuff. It's like, well,
I meant the aspect of that you have to work in order to survive.
Yes, but of course, things need to be active and working and stuff to survive. But why can't everyone work together? Why can't society collaborate together under socialism, under a better system where everyone is looked after and everyone's value is considered? And
basically,
if you let me finish,
sorry.
Don't worry. Everyone's contribution is mattering, not just based on how much money they make for someone else. If everyone is looked after, then it's a more productive society because everyone's work is being contributed to the end goal. And plus, in a society where there's fewer jobs because corporations and like companies, they don't want workers when they can have robots and electronics where they can cost less. When that is a thing, there's not going to be the jobs there to sell your labor hours for. So people are just going to be stuck in poverty or in on like minimum like welfare and stuff with no way out because there's no jobs. There's physically nowhere for them to go and work. And under the free market, that's fine because the corporations, like, they're not going to need to give anyone these jobs. So humanity's it's sort of at a stage where we need to evolve beyond capitalism, a deeply flawed system.
Yeah, if they don't want to hire anyone, that is their prerogative. And there is also the option that you could be like a self-sufficient human being and like grow your own food or even start your own business for that matter.
But that isn't like realistic for the vast majority of people. Like, if you live in an inner city area, where are you gonna like find like a garden patch or whatever to grow your own food? How are you gonna start your own business if you have no money to like buy property or get anywhere beyond paying your like taxes and paying rent on a property? Like, it's silly to just sort of say, oh, just do X, Y, Z and you'll be fine, because the means to do that aren't available to people because capitalism has left millions of people relying on barely like functioning jobs, barely minimum wage jobs to get by. And most wages are a lot of wages are below the living wage. People are literally dying in poor health because of the capitalist conditions we've been given. Not to mention the free market's general cause of concern for the planet as a whole. Like, look at what global warming is doing to the planet. Look at what climate change and environmental destruction is doing to the planet. And under capitalism, because we're more interested as a society with profit for the few than the well-being of everyone, the planet is being destroyed. You only have to look at the farming industry, for instance, or fossil fuel industry to see that profits being placed over people has allowed for massive issues to arise. Like, what's going to happen when fossil fuels run out? It's going to be a terrible, it's going to be a disaster. That's not considering the disaster that's going on with the environment at the moment, like with the ozone being depleted and stuff. And recently, an iceberg, part of the ice shelf is deteriorating from where they're going to have to redraw part of Antarctica. It's ludicrous to suggest that we can't move on from capitalism, and capitalism is literally destroying the planet.
Well, I would kind of say that it was for example, here in the U.S., we have pretty much we're decreasing our coal usage, and then we're increasing our natural gas usage. Is what I briefly read from some articles. I do not know the specific ones. I apologize for not sourcing or whatnot. But yeah, I see what you're saying. I consider myself a conservative, but at the same time, I struggle on the whole climate change argument. I kind of feel that is a bit of a different subject for later.
Well, I don't think there's an argument to be had about the climate change. It's a real thing that's happening.
You don't think that there is a pro-liberty solution towards to curtail climate change? Excuse me.
Well, when you say liberty, unless you mean liberate the proletariat from the bourgeoisie, but no, I think that climate change, because of the way capitalism is, because of the way we value profit and economic growth for corporations over the well-being of everyone and the well-being of the planet, we're not really going to see any change. Why is a corporation going to stop selling a good like oil and destroying the environment around it when it's making money? And ultimately, in capitalism, that's what is required. Why is Saudi Arabia and us countries in the Middle East going to stop selling their sheer wealth of oil and fossil fuels and stuff? Because when they can make billions from it. Hence why, you look at the richest people in the Middle East, they're billionaires. They're some of the richest people on the planet because they're able to sell oil and stuff. And as a result, they're destroying the planet consequently, and destroying the lives of those in places in regions of Africa where climate change is destroying crops and stuff and making it harder to live and eat, and they die obviously. But we're just keeping on polluting the environment. It's ridiculous to sort of say, well, I suppose you can't deny that because of capitalism even, we are going to face massive environmental change crises even, and we're already a lot of it's already too late because of the sheer refusal of capitalism to move beyond viewing profit as the only goal. And I think ultimately we need to realize that the free market isn't the tool to combat climate change, because again, if you allow corporations to do what they want, they're just going to do what's best for them, and what's best for them is to make money, because they can insulate themselves somewhat from the effects of climate change by just keeping on going how they go. So I think it's inherently tied to capitalism, because you allow corporations to dictate the discourse when it should be society as a whole banding together and saying, no, we need to change what we're doing.
We kind of moved on from ownership of property to climate change. Could we get onto that the climate change argument a little bit later? You still say that it is a stealing of labor for like for an employee to be offering their employment to a manager.
Well, and also, what like an employee willingly wants to like sell their labor hours for less than what it's worth.
What do you determine the value of labor? How do you determine that?
So the money that is produced as a result of their work. So, for instance, if like the workers make a car in a factory and the car is sold for £1,000, if it's 10 workers who made it, then each worker should receive 10% of the value of that car. I believe.
And not the owner of the car business? Well, okay, never mind. You keep on saying that business owners should not exist, right? Bosses,
Well,
managers shouldn't exist.
No, everything should be owned by society in a sense. So like the means of production should be owned by the workers, or in a sense, everyone should be able to contribute to it. Therefore, the like productivity, the goals, the drive of society isn't dictated by the few, but by everyone. And therefore, we can have a society which is productive rather than like just determined by the few. So, for instance, look at let me try and think of something. I'm trying to think of something which is owned by a few. Look at transportation, for instance. Transportation, like railways and just airports and stuff. A lot of it is really run down, really quite poor, because corporations would rather make money for themselves than improve things for everyone. Whereas if we had a system in which everyone was able to have control over it, if everyone could contribute to it and everyone had a say, and workers who were working for the benefit of everyone were working in those fields, transportation could really improve. And we'd have a lot less problems because of that. Like any market you can think of can be improved by not having privatized capitalist regimes in place. Look at housing, for instance. Look at the sheer like homelessness issues in the Western world, and then look at the number of empty properties just sitting like vacant. There's no need for homeless people to exist, but because of capitalism, we have people dying on the streets whilst like houses sit empty. Look at the amount of food that is wasted every year. That as a consequence of I don't know, like farming industries and food producers just throwing away food they can't sell and throwing away food that they deem unmarketable. There's just there's like food lost because of just greed, essentially being unable to sell it for more. And meanwhile, we have massive populations of people starving and below the poverty line, whilst all this food's been thrown away. It's like you just look at this sheer number of problems with capitalism and the way our society is, and it's like this doesn't have to happen. Why do people need to suffer?
So you would consider yourself like a libertarian socialist or an anarcho-communist or something along those lines?
To be honest, I don't really know specifically where I stand with those things. Probably close to an anarcho-communist, probably more of a socialist, I would say. Though
a libertarian socialist is what
maybe.
Okay, and so the what if, say, for example, like this perfect socialist utopia happens, where all the workers, where the average Joe, all the workers collectively own the means of production of everything. Mm-hmm. Own all the housing, own all the farming, own all the manufacturing for our phones and cars and all that crap. What if somebody freely wanted to set up their own business where they hired people? What's to stop them from wanting to set up their own business?
Well, like there's nothing wrong with self businesses, and indeed, under socialism, like these businesses don't disappear. Like there's nothing wrong with having like small businesses and stuff. The only thing that changes really is that they can't exploit their workers by seizing more than their share. Like so, for instance, if you have workers underneath you, you can't take more than what they generated. Like, you can't profit from your workers, essentially. It's all that would change.
I keep on losing my train of thought. This is why I keep on end up wanting to interrupt you, is because you say something and then you say a whole bunch of other stuff right after that when I wanted to make a point onto something you said a little bit earlier.
I tend to write things down during these debates to make it easier for me.
But what I mean by, if somebody wants to start their own business, like basically they start a traditional business like we have nowadays in our semi-capitalist Western society, because we aren't really 100% capitalist. Capitalism in its truest form would be anarcho-capitalism, is what I would say. But say in this libertarian socialist society of yours, all the workers, all the average Joes collectively owned everything, but as one single guy decided to find his own piece of land, build a building on top of that, make his own product that is unlike any of the other products developed before. And to produce this, he needs workers. And so he decides to hire on some workers, and then he grows his business from that point. What's to stop the person from starting and growing a business? And basically, we're back to square one.
But it's not. I mean, the whole, like, he can have his ideas, but if he's using workers to help him, then why should the workers not receive a fair amount of the money produced for what is done? Why can't? And also, his ideas, like going to society and being made.
Can I answer your question back there? You asked, why can't the workers be entitled to a fair portion of the production?
Yeah, essentially, because like, why? If he, like you said, he
no. I want to answer that question. The reason for being is that they don't own the business.
But I mean, they are the business, essentially. You said yourself he couldn't do it by himself, so he needed the help of others. So then why now he's got like what, 9, 10, 11 people helping him?
And he'll have to offer incentives to the employee to want to work for that business. A decent wage, maybe some benefits, perhaps.
Yeah, but and then the workers say, no, we are the reason you even have this product in the first place. Everywhere else is
well, first those workers have to get hired on before that can happen.
We get they get, like, there's no need for them to accept conditions or anything less than fair, because why would they? They've already got their like their way in society, because under a socialist society, people don't just get left behind like we do in capitalism. They don't just let people die simply because they can't sell their labor wage for like rip-off business owners. But even the idea of like claiming the land for himself, like all the land belongs to everyone. Everyone can share stuff. I don't feel as though we need to divide ourselves.
Say there is like an open plain that supposedly everybody owns, but it's vacated. It is owned by everybody, but it's vacated. There's nobody for miles occupying that piece of land that is supposedly owned. Well, okay, I guess that would be technically theft. Would there be like a police force in your circumstance to prevent people from, well, I guess stealing land and starting up their own businesses?
That's an interesting question, to be fair. I mean, I had not fully thought of all the little intricacies and stuff, and I'd have to explore some of them further. However, I do feel as though the police, as a concept, does have a lot of flaws. Just coming on to something S-Man has said in the chat. Communism, I was going to say. He's mentioned communism has 85 to 100 million reasons not to. Oh, it's not even like, I thought he was going to say like 85 to 100 million people have died from it or something, not reasons not to like it. Okay, right. Well, I want to speak about the sort of atrocities that capitalism has done, or I suppose US capitalism really, because like the stain of capitalism around the world is pretty colossal. Like if you look at what the US has done in order to further its own profits. You can sort of see why having a society run for the need of more profit is quite dangerous. So if you look at the actions the US has taken in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, all to further its own profits, and essentially the profits of the financial elite and the CEOs and business executives of the world, of the nation even, it's pretty disgusting. Like created famines through the destruction of land. They've participated in and aided the genocide and slaughtering of groups of people. So, for instance, millions of communists were killed in, I believe, Thailand. I can't remember. Yeah, Thailand. Indonesia, in fact, I'm pretty sure. You look at Latin America, where the US
millions of communists were killed. What do you mean by that?
As in, the US collaborated with right-wing forces to kill communists and members of the Communist Party. And sadly, the country has lost. I've lost the name of the country.
Can I interject here, or do you want to continue?
I've got one more thing to say, then I'll let you interject.
Okay.
The last one was going to be in Latin America, the US has overthrown countless legitimate governments, installed like capitalist supporters and like free market sympathizers of the US, and reap the profits. Look at Chile, look at Guatemala, El Salvador. Its crimes and its atrocities abroad are countless, and it's all in the name of capitalism and for more money. And if we have this as our motive in society, we'll keep on seeing this, because ultimately, if you place an advantage of wealth increasing for people, you're going to see atrocities happen. And we need to change that by removing capitalism and the inherent need for greed that these people have. Anyway, you were going to interject, sorry.
Yes, all these examples that you're bringing up sound more like examples of interventionism gone wrong. The United States being a police state when it does not need to be, more than it sounds like a free market capitalism where businesses were allowed to operate freely as they please.
No, the US knew what it was doing. The US is fully aware of its actions as a nation.
No. I mean, it's forcing. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
So, for instance, in Guatemala and El Salvador, the United Fruit Company, I believe, or it's like essentially a massive food distributor, was like in charge of vast areas of land in El Salvador and Guatemala, and people obviously in those nations didn't like it. So the government that was voted in were like quite left wing, were heading more socialist. And were giving land back to the people and nationalizing a lot of things. The US did not like this because their profits obviously decreased because companies that they had there weren't making as much money. So they backed and supported and aided a coup. The coup was successful because obviously the US against like little Central American countries, the US is going to win. And it was reverted back to capitalism. And obviously that led to the quality of life of workers there suffering. The US knew what it was doing because it needed and it benefits from capitalist intervention and the money raised there. Look at Chile, for instance, another country heading towards socialism. The US did not benefit from this, so it sends it backs Pinochet and his coup. The coup is successful, and you see human rights abuse take place. You see purges. You see all sorts of atrocities, but the US does not care because they make their money. Look at Venezuela. Venezuela is not. It's not socialist, but it's under non-US friendly control at the moment. And because the US has lost oil trade with Venezuela, because of its their reclaiming of the nationalized oil system and stuff, they've backed and blocked aid. They've blocked aid to the country as a whole, and they're helping and supporting the opponents of the Venezuelan government to try and reinstate capitalism there. Like we clearly see the US's actions are always to benefit itself, and I think it's really important we recognize that the US and its love of capitalism will always be an undermining factor in the world until we remove capitalism.
You know, it sounds kind of like we're moving on to the subject of interventionism and the United States being a police state, being the police force for the entire world. And just for a record, being for interventionism of other countries is not inherent to a free market capitalist belief.
But can you see why it happens, though? Can you see why the US is so eager to interject in any potentially non-capitalist sympathizing state? Because it wants more wealth. It wants to be at the height of the capitalist world we live in. It's why, for instance, the US's food quality is far below that of European nations, because the corporations make more money from bypassing like health standards and selling low quality food. Look at the conditions that farming is in the US, where you have these like massive cesspools of like feces and waste just allowed to rot in farms because it's cheaper to dispose of waste like that. Look at the way animals are treated because of capitalism. Look at the disgraceful conditions you see like chickens and cows and stuff treated in, because who cares about morals when you can have money? Any system using capitalism will always see atrocities committed because of the need for money and because of the lack of care. Other things are applied. To use an example that affects people, look at the conditions in Flint, where they've not had clean water for I think 3 years now, and it's simply because a corporation could not be bothered to keep itself in check, cannot be bothered to spend more money on making things safer, and the cost is thousands of human lives. It's a disgrace that this is happening, but it's inevitable because capitalism does not value human lives over profits.
By my observation of the whole Flint, Michigan situation, I haven't researched a whole lot of it, but by my observation of it, it was the governor or the mayor, whoever it was, acting foolishly. That was government incompetence more than it would be business incompetence. And yes, the company might have effed up as well, a bit in a sense. But that would be a failure of crony capitalism. Like, I don't know how you would be able to like privatize like water companies, how you'd be able to do that. I mean, electricity, I see an easier method of doing that. But like I said earlier before, governments and corporations working interchangeably with each other, directly with each other for the advantage of the corporation specifically, that would be crony capitalism, where they basically rig the game against everyone else. Like, I do not want the game to be legally rigged against anybody.
Well, I wouldn't actually say it is crony capitalism. I mean, yeah, obviously there is collusion at times. However, when the means of production, when the tools are handed solely to private entities with minimal regulation, it is in essence capitalism. And it is capitalism which it causes a corporation to allow health and safety procedures and general conditions to deteriorate to the point where a city can go 3 years without clean drinking water. Like, people say, oh, the West has been made so great by capitalism, and then you go to a place like Flint and they're having to receive water in water bottles and wash with tubs.
Generally, the West has been made great because of our capitalist endeavors.
Well, I mean, you mean the exploitation of the third world, essentially. Essentially, like, the reason the West is wealthy is because
a lot of
colonialism.
the reason.
Let me finish. Sorry, just to end my point. Essentially, the wealth that the West has is because of the colonial forces benefiting from the exploitation of others, and it's essentially why the West has so much money. Like, look at Britain; it made its wealth by colonializing India and the West Indies and regions of Africa, raiding its nation for its goods, using the workforce as essentially slave labor and forced labor, and then leaving. And yeah, fine, like, they left a few customs behind, but they also left the suffering of millions, and that is essentially the price of colonialism, and that's what gave the West its capitalist roots, and it's why it's at the top of the pile now. But even in the West, there are people who are starving. There are people who are in terrible jobs and in conditions which are unacceptable for a supposedly developed nation. Like, it's not acceptable for people in a supposedly, like, the world's third largest economy in the world, to be drinking water from like off water bottles you had to collect from a collection point because your city hasn't been giving clean water in 3 years. That's disgraceful. But they don't care because it's cheap. It's cheaper to focus on other things. It's better in their eyes to raise more profits for themselves and corporations and thus the financial elite than to help people not drink unclean water. I don't see how a system like that, where suffering is just acceptable because it's not as profitable as just ignoring it.
And I don't see as to how the Flint, Michigan situation is related to free market capitalism.
Well, why was it allowed to happen? Like, why? Because it's not a case of
Why was it allowed to happen? Because apparently crappy governors or I do not know specifically who it was. Crappy political figures got elected.
A pipe leaked with the I think it was a lead plant, and it essentially like ruined the water supplies and like filtration systems and stuff. But essentially, a lack of investment in actual health and safety, a lack of care applied by the corporation, and yeah, a lack of care in the legal situation too, allowed the situation to happen. But if we dig deeper, why are laws in America so backwards to allow this sort of thing to happen? Because we see corporations able to pump money in from the money they've already stolen from workers, able to pump this money into getting their laws enforced, because the wealthy can control politics. Because if you have money, it's easier to be a political force, because obviously, like, you can spend money on elections, you can spend more on just getting your ideas heard, and it's easier for you. Hence why, like, when the Republicans are in charge, and to be honest, the Democrats as well, because both parties are just right-wing and rubbish, to be honest. But corporations are at the core of both these like parties, and they're more concerned with making money than they are with benefiting society. And that is just capitalism, where you place profit over people. And ultimately, it has to change, because suffering is not acceptable, to be honest. I don't see why people should suffer while some people have billions and perfect lives, essentially.
Well, I don't believe in people suffering either. I believe in allowing them to flourish freely with their business and with their private property and all the free market capitalist subjects that come with it.
But can you see that, like, with the way the world's headed, there's not like, and even more at the moment, you can't just start a business. Like, if you're in, say, like an inner city area, like I said earlier, where's your business just going to come from? How are you going to be self-sufficient? It's not a real situation.
Well, either you work a high-skilled job or you get a loan or something like that to buy yourself a piece of land and set up your business.
What bank is going to give you a loan if you've got no money in the first place? Like, and what was the first thing you said?
Well, I've got money right now.
Sorry?
I mean, just to use an example.
Yeah, but you're one person. And even so, like, what happens? Like, there's no guarantee that's going to even work. Like, with education, for instance, that's another area where an education system which has the free market infecting it allows for massive inequality in the way education works. So, for instance, again, inner city areas with more people get given less funding. And as a result, the people there have a worse education because less people care, because obviously it's less profitable. And they have far lesser chances of succeeding in life. Look at then to study like at college and university and stuff. At university in my country, college in yours, I guess. They need to find money to be able to pay for their studies. And if you're rich, that's going to be easy. But if you're not, if you're from a poor disposition, then it's going to be a lot tougher. And that's the reason lots of people don't go to university from those poorer backgrounds. And that's like loads of people, like thousands, millions probably, of lost potential.
Well, I wasn't talking about capital, or excuse me, education just earlier, just for the record.
Yeah, education is lost because of capitalism's need to just put profit over everything. I think it's disgraceful that people lose out on a fair education because it's more profitable to invest in certain schools. Like, that's just awful.
You seem to be acting like it is virtually impossible for somebody to start themselves a business. And then I go saying either somebody works a high-skilled job or they get a loan for them to buy a piece of land. And then you were all like, how are you going to be able to get a loan if you don't have any money? And I said, I, for example, have money and can get myself a loan if I wanted to.
And can you start
what?
Could you start a business that would keep you like sustained and you'd be self-sufficient?
Well, it depends if I have the ambition and the effort to want to do so. This brings back to the old subject of how many people have leadership capabilities. I do not think that I have leadership capabilities enough to be running a business, to be quite honest with you. I'm just bringing this up as an example that it isn't impossible for somebody to start a small business and grow that small business through success and hard work and effort.
But it's highly unlikely. And even let's say even if
not everybody can be a super rich dude.
Well, there shouldn't be super rich. We shouldn't divide ourselves by wealth like that, I don't think. And you talk about hard work. What about people born into easier conditions than others? They get a much easier start to life. And yeah, obviously there's work to be put in as well, but it's not the same as like someone who's born into a richer family is going to have a lot less to do than someone born into a poverty family. Like, because there's a lot of additional burdens to be made when you've got a family in poverty. Like, imagine the difference between having both parents there because they've got more time to spend with you, a nicer school, nicer environment than say an area where there's more crime, where there's the school's a bit run down and it's not really had much investment put into it because no one cares, where businesses there's no investment into the area because it costs more and stuff, and it's not a very attractive area. And you realize that poverty sort of attracts people within poverty, and it's hard to get out of poverty, especially when jobs are decreasing in number and people are getting poorer. And it's not acceptable to see that in a supposedly thriving capitalist world. And we need, again, I keep going back to this, we need to realize that people suffering is not acceptable, and we need to put people over profits.
Yeah, people suffering is not acceptable. And I'll say again, I am open to the idea of a safety net for people.
But it shouldn't be.
At the same time, I do not want somebody's own personal private property to be taken away by the government and then given to someone else who did not own it from the start.
Well, I mean, you could argue that if you, like, anyone, like, at some point the property was not yours, though. I mean, like, if you go by that logic. But then also,
well, who owned the private property before me would be the question. I mean, did I steal it, or did I buy it, or did I just claim an empty piece of land that wasn't claimed by anybody? I mean, if it was stolen, well, then, yeah, that's unacceptable. But if I legitimately give the proper amount of money that the vendor for the land asks, well, then that is a legitimate ownership of the said piece of land, is if I give them the proper amount of money.
Going by that logic, though, I mean, what about the person who sold it to you? I mean, if you go back far enough, could you not see that, like,
it's no longer his private property because he made a legitimate exchange?
No, but what about the Native Americans and the people who were there, like, right, if you go far back enough, who were essentially kicked off their land? And like, what are them? Could they not then say, well, actually, no, all this is ours. You never made a transaction for us. We're living in, like, poor conditions to where we were.
If you really want to get into that big can of worms right there, yes, it might have been a theft at the moment there, and
it was theft.
But nobody who owned the land back then is alive now. So who would you give it to?
Their ancestors are living in worse conditions.
Their ancestors.
Wait, not ancestors. Like, predecessors. That's it. Yeah, but if they're alive, could they not equally say, well, if like, you can't take away private property, then what about ours? We're in worse conditions. We are statistically worse off because of the events of the past. We've never had legitimate recompense and reparation for this. Can we? It's our property. Get off. Using that logic. But then you would say that's a bit ridiculous because, like, then just going through history, like tracing back who owned what when, and it's like you go back far enough, and it's like, oh well, this is ridiculous. So having private property, having land able to just be claimed by people and then like prized up, I think is silly. And when people hear, oh,
Well, let's the case of, excuse me,
sorry, yeah, you go ahead.
The case of the Native American genocide, if you want, no, I'm just gonna leave it there. If the case of the Native American genocide, I'll just give you the benefit of the doubt on that subject because that is an entirely different subject right there. I'll just say that you're right. Yeah, white man way back 500 years ago stole from red man his land, and that was illegal. But say like in a legitimate situation, like say like in Europe, for example, in your country, maybe somebody wants to buy a piece of land from somebody else, and the exchange is made. That becomes the customer's land at that point because of the legitimate exchange.
But then, what if someone like looks further back than that and says, "Oh, well, a person who sold this to you before he sold it to you, their claiming of the land was not legitimate." Like going into like the well, when private property is yours once you buy it is, I think, quite foolish because I don't think land and
well, good luck trying
should be for just one person. And what I was going to say was, when people hear, oh, there's no private property under socialism, they immediately think of like, oh, your house can be just taken away and people will just come and live with you. And like, I think that's a poor misconception. All it means is that.
Oh, can I interject? Or do you want to finish?
I'm nearly finished. Yeah.
Okay.
All it means is that land can't just be prized off and kept away from everyone else. Because I think it's very unfair for, say, like, like massive fields and acres of land just kept unused and out of service whilst people are crammed into unfair closed conditions. Anyway, you interject. We should probably wrap up this little thing because I want to not go on for too much longer, if that's all right.
Yeah, you're getting exhausted, aren't you? I guess we'll just leave the feminism debate for another.
No, come on to feminism for a bit. I more meant just sort of wrap up capitalism for a bit and then come on to feminism for a little bit because I'm okay to go for a bit longer, but it's been nearly 2 hours now, I think. So.
All right. I equivalate the ownership of a business as the same as owning a house. You own both of them legitimately. They are your private property. One you conduct business in, the other you just reside in. They have different functions, but they are the same in the fact that you own them.
Sorry, I had a little mind blank there. No fault of your own. Could you repeat what you said, please? I misheard it. Sorry.
Okay. I equivalate a house to the same as a business in the fact that you own them. They are still your private property. You have different functions for them. One you reside in and one you conduct, well, business in. But they are both the same in that you are the proper and rightful owner of that land.
But do you not think that land should be distributed evenly and that transactions made in transactions made in a capitalist society involve an element of flaws and manipulation and extortion because of the nature of capitalism? And with a business, say like the guy who owns McDonald's, like, is it really his or is it the workers who are made McDonald's the success it is today? Because like I said earlier, take away the workers and the company's got nothing. Take away the boss and the workers can organize themselves. The boss needs the workers. The workers do not need the boss.
Hey, can you re-ask the question that you asked at the beginning there of your statement there?
About what? Fairness of land
of private property ownership.
I'm trying to think back to what it was. Sorry. So like how there's no need for land to be kept out of the ownership of society because
No. You asked a question like something along the lines of should land be distributed?
Oh, sorry. Why should land not be owned by all of society? Like everyone should be able to have.
Because no one else claimed it or cultivated the money to invest and ultimately buy off that land.
But I mean, you could argue that they haven't claimed it now. Like, look at the amount of people who are forced into paying landlords who own multiple properties. Like, what happens to the people living in those like houses? Do they just lose like their right to stay there? I think
that's not their private property. Then, if they're not the full-on owners of it, they're just renting it out. They're basically a paying resident of someone else's property.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Actually, yeah. Sorry, I messed up that bit. But the overall point though there is that like there's people who don't own anything and therefore are at the mercy of the system, and I think that's quite poor. And private property, like if you're saying, oh, whoever put the claim in it, it's a flawed system because like you can go back and find someone who owned it before you, and ultimately like force is what was needed to get it from you. So someone like look as recently as like only a few centuries ago, with traceable ancestors, where you can see people have been driven off their land or lost their land unfairly. But then obviously that's been years.
Like I said, I'm just giving you the benefit of the doubt on the whole Native American issue.
Oh, but even like not just Native Americans. Like imagine like a crime took place like 100 years ago, and that caused the family to stay in one place. But obviously 100 years later, the initial people aren't quite. Sorry, people living now aren't criminals, but the person who took it initially was a criminal. Like, does that family who've been living an honest life for their whole lives, do they just lose their private property for someone else? Like it's a very flawed way of doing things because
the same like apparently all white people would have their home taken back to the Native Americans.
Oh no, I only said that because if you're going down the person who owned it originally is a private property person, and the person like that because they're Native Americans could have a legitimate point. But we don't need to compete for this land. Land should be all collaboratively owned, and thus we can have a society where everyone has a nice home with the multiple resources we have. Anyway, I'll let you say a closing sort of statement about this bit now, and we'll talk about feminism a little bit afterwards.
My land, my property, keep it off keep your hands away from it.
Fine, all right then.
Don't tread on me.
Oh no. Oh god. Anyway, our final topic of the night: feminism, the bone of scorn for the internet. It seems over the last few years. Once again, you can begin. What are your views on feminism?
Well, I think that on the issue of say catcalling to start off with is not a national federal crime, it's more of a first world problem than anything. Somebody just randomly giving you a comment, like sexual assault, not acceptable, obviously, but catcalling, I think that people should just be getting a thicker skin. This would be the case of the women, or even if men were like being harassed by a woman, or even a gay man about how good they look, they should get the thicker skin as well. But of course, the subject is feminism and females. And yes, the gender pay gap. That despite whatever anecdotes you might want to bring up, nationally, or at least here in the United States, I'm speaking for the United States. I do not know how specifically it is in other countries, but the reason why there is a gender pay gap, or as War Corp 666 would define it as an earnings gap. Like at the end of the year, men earn more than women in total. The reason for that being is because it's based off of the median income of everybody in the groups. The two groups being man versus woman. And that you have the combined income of all of them, and then the total income is divided by the amount of people, and that is how you get your median income. That is what I have seen the gender pay gap was based off of. And the reason why men have a higher median income is because normally men take the harder jobs like manufacturing, for example, or lumberjacks, or and if there is a women in these fields or similar fields, it is mostly like an office job or something like that. Yes, if never mind. I've gone on long enough. I'll let you speak now.
Okay, some interesting points. So firstly, catcalling. It's very like all well and good calling it a first world problem, supposedly. But I think that just because something is worse in other parts of the world doesn't make it a legitimate issue in this part of the world. And a first world problem is still a problem. And for me, I prefer the first world problem should be a term used for like little trivial things, not something that is serious like catcalling. So the whole problem with it is that it's
wait, sorry, I was looking at the chat there. You said that were you essentially agreeing with me that catcalling is not that big of an issue?
no, it is an issue in my opinion. It represents sexist attitudes towards women, like because it shows that essentially people still view them as objects and they're just commenting on their appearance, and you don't need to express that. You're essentially sexualizing people you've never even met before, and ruining like or affecting their day. And in the context of the society we live in, where sexual assault and rape and harassment are real things that happen, it causes distress and panic because you never know whether the person who catcalls you is then going to do something more, is going to follow you, or even worse.
Well, punish the rape and not the expression of a compliment.
But it's not a compliment, is it, though? Because all you've said is that you're sexually attracted to them. Or
saying that you look good is not a compliment?
Well, yeah, but just like yelling at someone on the street, like, and just saying like sexually, like pervasive things to people who have no concern for you, it's ridiculous. It's unfair. It shouldn't be happening because it's essentially treating women as sexual objects when there's no necessary need for it. People should be able to not view women as just something to yell things at. And yeah, fine, it happens to men somewhat as well, but nowhere near in the same proportion that it does to women. And coming on to what you said about the gender pay gap, and yeah, technically it is. It isn't as like the way it is. It's not as it has sometimes been misreported, but there is still a gap in areas. There are still gaps in the way women and men are paid, but also there are societal factors which make it clear that why men are more likely to end up in certain roles and why men make up certain jobs positions. Like it's like, for instance, the way men and boys and girls are brought up, the way hiring of these jobs works. Like it's more to it than just men do hard jobs, therefore it's natural they get paid more. Like
yeah,
it's a more complex issue than that, I feel. So I think it's quite unfair to just sort of say, oh well, it's just because men are like this and that's the way it is. Because there's and also like we come on with that sort of stuff, we come on to the issue of like job-based discrimination and stuff, and the high numbers of women who face abuse and stuff and like discrimination at their workplace.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you know of any studies that mention specific numbers of how many women are, well, actually, even that is kind of hard to analyze. For you to be, you would have to have somebody observing 24/7 in the workforce how much a woman is getting paid and how much a man is getting paid, but then you would have to see like in the same work field, like say, for example, a woman working a desk job and a man working in a desk job. And then you would have to have somebody like a bureaucratic worker or something like that observing 24/7 or while on the job anyways, at all times while they're on the job, of how hard each one is working. So I was about to ask you if there was a study that goes talking about the specific amounts of women who get paid less despite doing the same amount of work in the same fields, working just as hard as their male counterparts. But then again, I thought to myself that would be hard to observe.
Well, if I want, I don't have a study to hand, but I could probably quite easily find one. there have been numerous studies done onto this, and they do find generally that there are issues in workplaces, and even studies which show that even the studies which show that gender pay gap is more of an earnings gap, and there are more nuances to it. They concede that there are issues with the way women and men are treated at work and stuff. But I think there's even more to the need for feminism than just how much they're paid and stuff. Like we could look at the way rape is dealt with, and like sexual assault and stuff. We look at the way rape victims are dealt with, where often they aren't believed and they have lies made up about them.
Rape is not a business-specific subject.
Sorry?
I said rape is not a business-specific subject. Like, that is not because of the manager. Like, unless the manager is the rapist.
I meant in general. Sorry, I meant like I was sort of moving beyond the gender sort of workplace stuff.
I kind of feel like that we are. I kind of feel like that we were veering off of the gender pay gap. What, are you done with that subject?
Well, not entirely done with it, but I was more to sort of, because I want to be a little bit less, spend a little bit less time on feminism than on the other one. Like, perhaps we're gonna have a more full-length discussion on this another time. But yeah. I was just sort of doing a whistle-stop tour of things I think feminism is still relevant for.
Feminism was the last subject that I wanted to briefly touch on. If you was one to talk about, say, for example, religion versus atheism or climate change or any other subject, the Native American genocide, maybe, I wanted to kind of save that for another day.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
I mean, I especially want to let you get to bed for whatever you might have in the morning.
Yeah, gosh, because it's 1:10 now in the UK. So, but no, I suppose to sort of wrap up, I see sexually, politically, emotionally and stuff, we still have gender inequalities, and it's important to fight them. But I think we'll sort of draw it to a close in a second. So you sort of give your brief views on feminism and stuff, and then we'll sort of end and have a like little farewell and stuff.
Yeah, and okay, so closing statement. You briefly mentioned of how politically it is unequal amongst sexes. Like the issue of women, of how many women are in politics, isn't an issue in of itself. Now, obviously, you're going to be thinking to yourself that it's a sign of how much women are not represented, and because they're not being represented enough, their ideals are not being put into effect enough. But there are feminist men, like if that is who you prefer to be running the country, as feminists. And again, catcalling, not a big issue, and public breastfeeding as well. I do not think any legislative action should be taken either way on that issue. I mean, it is not a big deal if a woman was to at least like take a blanket. I do not have a real issue with women public breastfeeding, but I have an issue against public nudity personally. And it isn't too much of an effort for a woman to just like cover themselves up with a blanket and so forth. And gender pay gap, I pretty much covered that issue. Yeah, I say that it doesn't exist on a national scale. I mean, yes, there will be anecdotes of, say, my mother or my aunt, or I am paid less than my male counterparts for the same exact work and the same effort in it, in the same field. But nationally, it doesn't exist. That's what I'll say.
Well, I'll touch on a few of those things just quickly, obviously, before we end. I think that catcalling, as I've already said, there's more to it than just a compliment. It affects how people feel, and feelings are obviously important because people being unhappy in society isn't a good thing. We need to sort of move past the idea that it's just people saying things how they like, because if that's the case, if we're just trying to please people, then what about the people who are being affected by it? What about the people who are worried that there'll be more, that it's like weird having men make leering comments towards you? Because it's not something that makes you feel good having weirdos like follow you around and say like, oh, you look good today. Because it's like, well, no, that means you're like viewing me sexually, and that's a bit weird if you're just walking past on the street and you can't help but like yell it out.
because that'll be the first thing that you'll notice about a person is how they look.
Yeah, but then what? So you just impulsively have to say it, and it's like if you.
I wouldn't say that necessarily.
Well, but some people do. Some people feel the need to just comment on someone else's appearance, and given that rape and sexual assault and stuff, they're still pretty big issues in society. Sadly, you can not be surprised. It's not that uncalled for someone to be a bit worried of someone who is doing that. I'm trying to remember what else you said. Politics. I think I don't know if you know what substantive and descriptive representation is, but in an ideal world, substantive description would be how we elect our officials, where what you say and what you think is what gets you elected. But we have to consider that education is not equal, and we still have sexism in society. Therefore, because of the lack of women in a lot of parliament and politics and government and stuff, there are still issues with sexism in politics, and the hiring processes and stuff are flawed. I'm trying to think what else you said. I may just sort of conclude it with saying, but I think that feminism is pretty crucial, and especially with the sort of people we're seeing on the rise at the moment, the far right, and people like Donald Trump and stuff. I think it's important to be wary of sexism and be supportive of feminism. But that is where we're going to end it today. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to you, Zach, for a pretty fun, interesting debate. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Yeah, I did. I'm glad that we could keep it at a decent level instead of contribute to the internet cancer that is on YouTube.
Well, exactly. And certainly, I hope to do another debate on some other topics and stuff with you again, because it'll be interesting.
Probably will.
Well, exactly. No, it'll be interesting to have another one. So I want to thank everyone for watching. It's been 2 hours. So if you watched all of this, then thank you for sticking with us. And we'll see you all again next time. Check out Zach's channel, because I'm sure he's got other stuff in there. I'll be watching a few of his videos myself. And we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.